Okay. Um, Hi, everyone. Good morning or evening, depending on where you are. My name is Marta. I work at Education USA in São Paulo, Brazil. So it's good morning for us in Latin America. And today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about studying in the US as an undergraduate, so the degree that you get right after high school. Before we start, just to give you an idea on what Education USA is, we're a network of advising centers for students that need information on studying in the US. The Education USA network is supported by the Department of State, so it's one of the official sources of information on studying in the US. So if you're interested in getting more information about how to study in the US as an undergraduate, you can look for Education USA locally. So here at the bottom you can see educationusa.state.gov. That is the website where you can see the Education USA centers all around the world. So feel free to look for a center closest to you. Today we're going to talk about the undergraduate admissions process in a general way, and then you'll have some time to ask questions. So a few of the general characteristics of the educational system in the US are that universities in general value diversity and have a lot of autonomy. That's very important when we think of different higher education systems in the world. Okay, so they're asking to raise the mic on the microphone. Let me know if it's better, okay? So universities in the US are very value diversity, both in terms of the teachers, the professors on campus, and the staff they have, as well as when we're talking about the students. So universities in the US are very interested in having students from around the world on campus, just because that brings in the variety of opinions and backgrounds and makes discussions all the more rich when you're in class and on a daily basis. Another thing that's important to know is that universities in the US need to be accredited in order for your diploma, your degree, to be valid. So if you have any questions about institutional accreditations, Education USA in any country can give you information on that as well. It's important because when you come, for you to have a valid diploma, to be able to have the proper visa to study in the US, to be able to have a valid diploma once you come back home, or if you stay in the US for other programs, you need to have a diploma from an accredited institution. So be very careful about this. In the US, there's no free education. There are public universities and private universities. Both of them are paid for. So if you go to a public university, the big difference is that they have two different fees, two different tuition rates. One for students that whose families live within the state, and another for students that are out of state. So most of us as international students will pay out of state tuition while we're studying in the US. And for private institutions, there's one single rate no matter where you come from. If you're from a different state or from a different country, that'll be the tuition you'll be paying for. I want you to keep this difference in mind when we talk about financial aid further on, but there are these different kinds of universities. The other thing to think about is that there are different kinds of higher education institutions in the US. We have the junior or community colleges that are 2-year degree institutions that for Americans can offer an associate degree that can already give them a chance of working in the US. For most international students, it's the beginning of 2 years of a 4-year undergraduate program. So you'll do 2 years as an undergrad at a community college and then transfer into a four-year institution. So you'll do 2 years at a community college, then another 2 years at a college or university. So this is one program, one way of getting into higher education in the U.S. What are the interesting aspects of a community college? The admissions process is a little bit easier in terms of logistics, so what you have to send to the university. And the other item that's interesting is that community colleges tend to be a little less expensive than four-year universities. So it's a way of also not spending so much on those 2 first years of education. Other than that, you can also apply directly into a university, college, institute of technology, etc., one of these kinds of institutions, so that you can complete your full bachelor degree, your full undergraduate degree at one of these institutions. Again, one of the differences is that the admissions process can ask you for a little bit more when you're going into a university or college and may require you to apply a little bit earlier on. So it's important to know which institutions you want to apply to, what each one of them requires from you. So those are a few considerations. I see there was a question here about medical students. So it's interesting to talk about a few different careers that in a few countries, as in most countries in Latin America, a medical degree is an undergraduate degree. You can finish high school and start your medical degree. That's not the case in the United States. Students complete a 4-year bachelor degree, apply to medical school, and then complete another 4 years to get their medical degree. And that kind of structure can also be seen in a few different areas as law and veterinary medicine, dentistry. So for many countries, we won't recommend students to get a medical degree in the U.S. or one of these degrees in the U.S. unless you are sure that there is a way to bring this degree back to your country. So if you're thinking of other areas like business, or there's a question here about journalism, that's not really an issue. You can go to the U.S., it'll be a 4-year undergraduate degree as any other. So for many areas, there won't be an issue with this. But for a few critical areas within health, within law, you just have to be sure that your American degree would be valid in your country of origin in case you do have to come back. So for Latin America, many times we're telling students to be very careful with this so that they don't come back to Brazil with a medical degree that they won't be able to use here. So you always have to have a way to come back home. But going into the admissions process, in itself, what do you need to be admitted to a university in the U.S. as an undergraduate student? So the admissions process for universities in the U.S. is holistic. That means they're looking at your profile as a whole. They want to see your grades, but they also want to see what you do outside of the classroom. So they're going to ask for different documents that will show them those aspects. So one of the things that you need in terms to be admitted to a university in the U.S. is a solid academic background. So good grades in school throughout your high school years, especially, so that you can show them what kind of student you've been this far and what kind of student you'll probably be at the university. Universities also require for admissions into undergraduate programs that you have a certain level of English. So they'll ask you to take one of these tests, either a TOEFL or an IELTS, to measure or to evaluate your level of English and establish if you can go straight into an academic program, or for some universities, if you could be conditionally admitted and take some English before you start your academic classes. So it doesn't mean that you absolutely have to have that minimum, but if you don't have the minimum that the university requires, you can see if they offer an English program and start with the English program and then move into the academic. For a community college, these scores can also be a little bit lower, and they will complement it with English classes as well. So it's important to know that universities expect students to have a certain level of English proficiency when they start their academic classes, because you'll be writing papers, you'll be participating in class discussions, and you just need to show them you have the level to start participating as soon as you get on campus. They'll also, some universities, many universities will ask for you to take an additional test, which is also taken by American students. These are general knowledge tests, so you can choose between the SAT or the ACT. The goal of these tests is to understand how you compare, or what scores you get on this American, very specific kind of test for university students. So you can take one or the other, and someone's asking, what are the differences? So what we usually tell students is that you should be very aware of your profile as a student, and also look into both tests before deciding which one. So if you're the kind of student that has very strong reasoning skills, that can kind of figure problems out without a lot of theory behind it, so you kind of work things out, you'll probably work very well with the SAT. If you're used to, or if you work very well with content-based tests, so the ACT is based on the content students have in high school in the US. So the SAT only has verbal, math, and writing. The ACT covers a few more content areas of high school curriculum. So if you're that kind of student that kind of remembers a lot of what you've studied in terms of content, this might be an interesting test for you. Either way, you should look into both tests and then decide which one you're going to prepare for and take that test. Don't keep moving back and forth between the tests. Try to focus on one. The question is if international students can or should take the ACT, since it's based on the content of an American curriculum. If you prepare for the test, many systems of education around the world cover more or less the same topics that are covered in the American curriculum. So you need to look at the test, prepare for it because of the timing and the specific formats, but you could probably look into it, and many students do take the test and prefer it over the SAT. So find which one fits you best. Another thing that you need to tell universities when you're applying, so this is at the beginning of the application process, you need to tell them where you expect your sources of funding to come from. So you need to let them know if you will be funding your degree, your family will be funding your degree, or if you're looking for financial aid. This can be through merit, need, or sports scholarships. We'll talk about this a little bit more, but it's important that you tell universities, you let them know where you expect to get the funding from for your undergraduate degree. Another thing that's important for universities to create this full profile of what kind of student you might be at the university is giving them information on your extracurricular activities. What do you do other than go to school? They want to know that you're going to be a student that will take full advantage of what's offered on campus, all the activities, all the clubs, and that you will continue being a strong student academically while being involved in other activities. So this really helps them evaluate you as a student. So all these criteria that I kind of went through for admissions are translated into documents that you send the university. So basically you'll send them an application, which is a form, an admission form that you fill out. It can be an online application for one specific university or a common platform, as is the Common App that many universities use. You will also send your high school transcript translated into English. So this is an important part so that they can see your academic background. You'll also send in essays. They ask you to write essays or a kind of personal statement where you're talking about your background, your life, what's important to you. So this is also a glimpse into how you think, how you write, and how you value things that you've lived. They'll also ask for recommendation letters from your professors, from your teachers, so that they can understand what kind of student you were, how you interacted with the class materials, with your colleagues, with your teachers. So this is an important part of your application process as well. They'll ask for your extracurricular activities. You'll probably have an application fee for each institution you're applying to, and then you'll send your test results, either the TOEFL or the IELTS, either the SAT or the ACT. So I'm going to pause quickly just for 2 questions. So one important question when we're talking about academic your academics, right? One person's asking, we don't use the GPA system, which is the grade point average system that they use in the US. Basically in the US they have a 4-point scale, which will show what your grade point average is over the course of your high school. Many countries do not work on this GPA, on the same GPA scale or system. So you have to find, you don't have to necessarily report a GPA. A few universities will ask you to send your high school transcript to a transcript evaluator, and through that evaluation they'll be able to understand what your transcript looks like in the American GPA. And some universities do not require that, but they ask you to send in what the grading system looks like for your country or your school, and they have access to a lot of this information through different systems. So they'll try to convert, or they'll evaluate you within your context. So you don't have to necessarily convert to a GPA, because many times that does not work perfectly. So the other question here is, do you need to send a physical file or actual document when you're applying through the Common Application? And the answer is, it depends. If everyone involved, your teachers, your school, is sending information in online, you won't have to send any physical documents to the US until you're admitted. Once you're admitted, you'll probably have to send your original transcript via mail. If your school decides not to use the online system, they'll have to send information via mail to the US. Okay, so let's move a little bit forward. One of the items that we also always have a lot of questions about is, how does financial aid work in the US for international students? So of course, when you're applying to the US, many students will use some or the full will cover fully their funding with family funds. So you have to tell the university that's how you intend to pay for your education. You can also apply for merit and need scholarships. So a few universities offer need-based scholarships, need-based financial aid. So the idea is that they will calculate, based on the documents that you send, your financial aid. Other institutions will only offer merit scholarships, for which you can be considered automatically at some institutions, and at other institutions you'll have to fill out a separate application for this. So you always have to look into the financial aid portion of the university. Be careful if you do need financial aid. Some universities are very clear about not being able to offer financial aid for international students. And when you're applying to sports scholarships, this is something that has to be a conversation that needs to start very early on with the universities you intend to apply to. You need to be accepted both academically and have the interest of a coach. So you need to start that contacting the institution earlier than students that are applying for other need or merit scholarships. So there's a question here: will university merit and need scholarships prefer Americans over others? So there are a few universities that, in terms of need-based financial aid, We'll look at Americans and international students in exactly the same way. And other institutions that cannot do that, they have limited funds for international students. So you have to look that up on a website, on their website, and see which institutions, what the institutional policy is on need-based financial aid for international students specifically. In the case of merit-based scholarships, you'll see that there are a few scholarships that may be specific for state students, for students within a city, or students that come from a certain ethnic group, or for international students. So merit-based scholarships can have earmarks, right? They can be marked for a certain group. So you have to look at the website and see what the scholarships are and what the eligibility criteria is for those scholarships. I'll just add that many Education USA offices around the world have what we call the Opportunity Program for students that would not be able, Opportunity Program, that would not be a opportunity. I don't think I can edit this, but it's Opportunity Program for students that might have high academic potential but would not be able to cover the cost for the admission process for testing to the U.S. So if that's your case, you can go online at the educationusa.state.gov website, look at the Education USA centers in your region, and ask if they do offer, if they do have the Opportunity Program in that country. Not all countries have the program. So when we're looking, everyone comes from a different educational system, and we work on different calendars. But when we're looking at the process of admissions for universities in the U.S., we try to show students a very general guideline of what your year should look like when you're applying to the U.S. So many of the deadlines from universities are around January or February, sometimes very early January. So the idea is that you have to do all your admission process until December to send in the information. So you're going to work on choosing universities, you're going to prepare and take your SAT test, your TOEFL. In the second semester, you're going to write your essays, fill out your application forms, request your translations and your recommendation letters. That's all going to happen throughout the year. And then you'll have to send in all those documents electronically or via mail, depending on the institution, before the deadline. So this is important for you to consider in your activities throughout the year. Usually between January and April, you'll get an answer from the universities about whether you've been accepted or not to the institution. If you are accepted, you'll still have up to May, usually. May 1st is traditionally the date that you'll have to answer to universities, telling them if you accept the offer to study at their university or if you will be going to a different institution. And your classes will begin in September of the following year. So if you send your application by December 2014, you will receive information about your admissions early in the year in 2015, and you'll decide and go to study in the U.S. in September 2015. So we actually have the previous year's calendar here on the slide. I'm going to just pause a little bit and have a look at the questions that are up. So one question here from Enrique is, if you've changed from one education system to another over the past years, how can you kind of explain your grades and explain what has happened? So Enrique, your school, whoever is going to fill out information from your last school, the school where you will be completing your high school degree, will be key in explaining what has been going on with you academically. So they can talk a little bit about your curriculum, the curriculum you're going to finish your school at, but they can also talk a little bit, they can write a letter specifying a little bit about what you've been through in terms of academic systems. Your final transcript usually has information about all the schools you've been through, so it'll be your final transcript. If that's not the case, you may want to submit the transcripts from the different educational systems so that the university can understand or can evaluate. Universities have a very wide range of knowledge on different educational systems, so that shouldn't be a problem, but we do understand that it can cause a few differences in terms of grading when you're applying, when you look at the entire transcript. So another question is it possible to apply for scholarship in government institutions? So the U.S. government, international students are not eligible for federal aid in the U.S., so from aid from the U.S. government for university. If your country has a scholarship program, you can apply to that scholarship program and work out the finances with the institution in the U.S. There's a question if fall admission is better than spring. It's not necessarily better. More institutions offer fall admission than spring admissions, but there are institutions that will offer admissions in winter, spring, fall, summer. So for a few universities, you have different admissions dates. So you have to look into what will be better for you, will be more interesting for you. So there's a question here about a senior who is confused about which test to take between IELTS, TOEFL, and SAT for undergrad universities. So, and she's asking if she's late. It's she. If she's late for sending her applications in 2014. So basically, you should look into the university website. You have to have a list of universities and check which tests they require from you as a student. But in general terms, many universities will ask you to take either the IELTS or the TOEFL to demonstrate your level of English, and then either the SAT or the ACT for applying to universities. There's still time to take these tests throughout the year. You'd probably have to send them in by December, and if you're planning on starting your studies in September 2014, you might want to look into community colleges that will not require all the documentation. If you have to still take your SATs to start classes in 2014, that's a little bit more complicated. For specific information on scholarship programs to your region, you can contact your local Education USA offices so that they can tell you if there's anything regional for the students. I do not have information here about every country. So one question is, how do I explain that I have lower grades? So different universities will accept different profile students. And the idea is that they're looking at you within your context, so they want very good students from their context. So if in your country grades are lower all around for everyone, they want to know if you were one of the best students or if you were a good student in your class. So if you need to give any explanations about your academic background and history, that can basically be done through your academic recommendation letters. It can be done through your counselor, and someone can explain. There's also room for you to give an additional explanation yourself if that's necessary. Education USA does not offer scholarships for international students. We do not administrate scholarships, but we do gather information on scholarships, both country-specific or region-specific, and university scholarships offered worldwide. So you can always access the Education USA website, educationusa.state.gov, and look up information on that. So the session is focusing on undergraduate studies, so I'm kind of avoiding the graduate questions just so that we can prioritize the undergraduate questions. So if a university says you can send a letter of recommendation, but it's not necessary, whenever they say something is recommended, that they recommend you send it, but it's not absolutely necessary, you can actually choose. We always recommend students to send at least one letter. That will help the university see who you are as a student. So you don't have to. They will consider your application without it. But if it's something that you can do, it wouldn't hurt you to send a letter of recommendation. Hopefully. Okay, so one of the questions here is, I'm an American citizen and I'm studying in a different educational system. So if you're an American citizen and you're studying outside of the US in a country that does not speak English, you might, or not at an American school either, you might have to take the TOEFL test. So we do have students that have spent most of their academic life in high school in countries like Brazil or Argentina, and when they do apply to the U.S., they talk to universities before doing this, but sometimes they'll say, since you've been in a different educational system, as long as the system isn't in English or isn't an American school abroad, you might have to take the TOEFL test. So I'd say check with the university, but if you're studying in a different language or a different system, you might be required the TOEFL test. So the other question, is it possible to apply to universities in the US even if you've already finished high school 3 or 4 years ago? There's no age limit, or there's no specification for many universities about who can apply to an undergraduate degree. So you will be able to apply to some universities in the US, many universities I'd say. There might be a few universities that would put some kind of limitation on that. Anyway, it's always important to let the university know what you've been doing for those past 3 or 4 years. That's always interesting. Someone's asking if universities accept critical reading scores instead of the English language requirement, instead of the TOEFL test or the IELTS test. A few universities will set a score for the critical reading portion of the SAT test, and will accept that as proof of English. So for a few universities, that'll be 650 out of 800. So you need to be careful to look at all universities and see if all of them would accept that score. The other question is, I have poor grades in 9th and 10th grade. Would that be a problem in my application? If you have an upward trend in your grades, that can be less of an issue. If you had a family issue, if you changed from one city or state or country to another, you can always explain what happened. But the idea is, if you have an upward trend, if you're getting better in terms of your grades, you can always explain, and that can have a very positive aspect. So another question is how to prepare for the SAT for international students. So we have many materials online through the College Board and through other institutions, including prep programs online. That's one way of studying. Having materials that you can use and study on your own can also help. It really depends on what's available in your region and what kind of student you are. Students do need some discipline to sit down and study for a few hours a week and have a schedule about how you're going to study for the test. But it really depends on what's available to you in your country. There are several questions here, so I'm going to try to answer as many as possible, but there's still quite a lot. So since I'm probably not going to be able, I'm going to still answer a few more questions, but since I probably won't be able to answer absolutely all of them, I just wanted to let you know that Education USA offers several services worldwide that can help you in your admission process to the US. So most centers have group advising sessions or one-on-one advising sessions. You need to inform yourself on how these services work for each advising centers. They'll have information on the admission process and again specific information on scholarship opportunities regionally and from US institutions. A few centers do offer translation services, which are certified, so they are official for any university that you're applying to in the US. A few may have material available to help you study for tests as the SAT, the TOEFL, the ACT, and also lectures with American universities that visit each country every year. So look into your local Education USA advising centers and see what they have available in terms of services, materials that you can use. Okay, centers are a little bit different from one country to another, but that's the general idea. We still have a few more minutes, so I'll go back to questions and see how much we can actually answer. So there's a question here about recommendations being sent online. Some universities will give you, most universities will give you the option of sending teacher recommendations either online or via mail. So you can actually choose, your teachers can actually choose how they're going to send it. But today, mostly students will have to put in an email for their teacher and the teacher will decide how they'll send the letter. So there's a good question here about the visa process. So basically, students that go for their full undergraduate studies in the US will go under a student visa. You will only start your process to get your student visa once you've already been accepted to the university. So your first step will be getting accepted, and then the university will issue a document, either an I-20 or a DS-2019, which you will use at your local consulate or embassy, your US consulate or embassy in your country, to request your F1 or J1 visa. Those are two common categories for people that are going to study in the US. So you do need to be admitted before starting your visa process. And it's also important to remember that you'll have to demonstrate both to the university and to the consulate that you do have financial means to cover the costs of your study in the US. So if you get a full scholarship, that will be demonstrated on the document that the university gives you. If you get a smaller scholarship, that will also be there. You need to know where the funding is coming from so that you can show that to your local embassy and consulate. So one question here is, if you're already studying in your home country as an undergraduate and you want to transfer to a different area of study in the US, is that possible? And the answer is yes. Your admissions process will have a different name. It will be a transfer process. So you need to look for transfer international student information on admissions. But when we look at the required documents, you'll send an application. Instead of just sending your high school transcript, you'll have to include your undergraduate education as well, whatever you've done so far. And many of the other materials are similar in terms of application. So there's an interesting question about gap years. The question is, are universities against gap years? And the person's wondering if admissions chances decrease because of a gap year. I would say universities are not against gap years, and that your chances of being admitted don't necessarily decrease because of a gap year. What's important to universities, what have you been doing during that gap year? Why did you take the gap year? So if you take a year to study for the test, to prepare for your exams, but you also have other interesting activities going on, that might not be an issue. But if you spend a gap year at home doing basically nothing that you can tell a university, that might be a little bit of a bigger issue. So they're not against gap years per se. You just need to know what you're doing that gap year that will make your application, or that will highlight your expertise even more. So let me find a few more questions here. So there are more people asking about beginning classes in September 2014. I'm putting up the general guideline for what the admissions process looks like for most students, or the traditional process. But for students that want to start their classes in September 2014, there might still be a few university options. There probably are several options in terms of community colleges. If you're looking for financial aid, if you need assistance, then it's less likely that you'll be able to go this year. You need more time to prepare and take the tests and show them that you're a valuable candidate to the institution. But I'd encourage you to contact the institution, to look at your university list, and to look for an Education USA center nearby that can help you figure out what your next steps would be. So there are other concerns here about grades dropping throughout your high school years. Again, universities will take into consideration if something out of your control happened, if there was something with your family, some specific situation that you went through that made your grades go down a little bit. That's something that you can explain to the university and that they will consider, okay? Okay, another question that we have here, we actually have a few questions about work. So let me go back to this part that I actually skipped, but we come back to during questions. So many students are asking if they can work in the US while they're studying. And the answer is, it depends. On your work, on your student visa, on your F1 visa, you can work 20 hours a week on campus with an authorization from your international office. So those are the conditions, and you can only work on campus. If once you're finished with your undergraduate studies, once you graduate, you can choose to be a part or to do an OPT, which is the Optional Practical Training Program. This program means that you can spend a year, a little bit more depending on your area of study, actually working in the US once you have graduated. But during your undergraduate program, during your college years, you can work up to 20 hours a week on campus. This work will not pay for tuition. It will be money that will help you on your daily expenses, but it will not be sufficient money to pay for your tuition or for housing, so you need to find other ways to cover those costs. I'm just having a look at the questions to see what the main concerns are, since we just have a few more minutes. So there's a question here about SAT scores. If I have very low SAT scores, or if my SAT scores aren't exactly the best in the world, can I still apply to universities? So there are many universities that do not require an SAT, but they will look at your high school transcript to support that information. Additionally, there are many community colleges, for instance, do not ask for your SAT scores. And you can always look into the range of scores that a university students usually have, and use that as a parameter to help you choose universities that might accept you even with a lower score. Okay, so there are just a few we just have time for maybe 2 more questions, so I'll try to answer kind of generally. There are still a few questions about testing and about how universities evaluate international transcripts. So I'll go back to that very quickly to see if we can kind of cover those questions. So a lot of students are asking, if I did not study in the US, how do they evaluate my high school transcript? US universities either have a person or a group of people in the office that specialize in different transcripts from around the world in different educational systems, so they would be able to analyze your transcript within that context. But there are also universities that will ask you to send in your transcript to an evaluator, so that they will receive a report on your transcript, and then will be able to understand what your transcript actually means. So the idea of having an international transcript will not affect negatively not for being international, it will not affect your admission process negatively. But you as a student are responsible for sending in any supplemental information to help the university understand your transcript. So they do understand that different countries have different systems, and they do have general guidelines on what the systems look like. But if your school is particularly hard on grades, for instance, that's something that your school counselor or a profile from your high school will help the university understand. So school profiles and what your counselor can tell the university about you are 2 ways of putting you into a context so that the universities can understand what kind of student you've been. And the other question that's coming up a lot still is about testing. So there are many universities that do not require the SAT. There are universities in which you do need a high SAT score to be admitted. Not just that, but that's one of the parts. The idea is that since this is a holistic process, some universities say that they don't want to see the SAT score because that doesn't give them much information on you. Other universities will factor the SAT in as one of the elements of your application process. So it's never going to be the only one or the central focus of your application. If you get great scores on the SAT and have nothing else that's interesting on your application, that will not guarantee admissions or will not make you an interesting candidate, not for a test score. There was a question about SAT scores and getting into Ivy League schools. When we look at websites from the College Board, College Search, or other college search systems, you can look at the range of scores most students get at university that enter the university have gotten on the SAT. You can take that as a parameter to know what kind of scores that specific institution has expected from students, or students that have been successful have had. So that's a great parameter to look at how you should look at the test. If you're a little bit below that or a little bit above that, you know how you stand in comparison with other students. So again, testing, SAT or ACT, should not be the central focus of your application. You need to have other parts of the application as strong as your scores. So a good high school transcript, good essays, good recommendation letters, a list of interesting extracurricular activities, and your test results will help the university look at you as a whole, look at your entire history within admissions. So this is something that you can work on. And again, I'll put this last slide up so that you can, oops, I'm going to write in the Education USA. Oh, we have it at the bottom. educationusa.state.gov has several resources for international students, including one that's called 5 Steps to Study in the U.S. This is a great resource that will help you from the beginning of your process to the very end of it. There's information on how to choose a university and how to get a visa to the university, so from beginning to end. In addition to that, you can look up on the website the Education USA offices within your region. These offices you'll be able to contact them and understand when they have information sessions, be a part of their online communities through Facebook. You'll be able to participate in any visits that university visits to your region. So be sure to look at Education USA locally so that you can have access to more specific information to your educational context, to your educational system, to the scholarships from your government, or for general information on scholarships from universities in the U.S. So this is just an introduction, a general conversation about applying to universities in the U.S. I do hope we were able to cover a few of your questions and a few of your doubts about the process, but I do encourage you to continue, look for an Education USA office in your region to speak to that office specifically. So thank you, College Week Live, for inviting us to participate once again. And I wish all of you the best in your application process. And if you need any help, if you need further advising, look for an Education USA office close by, and they'll be able to help you with the next steps. So thank you again, and I hope you have a good day or evening or night, depending on where you are. Bye-bye.